Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Hope you're all doing well. So this is episode number 2 of my Live Rich, Spend Less Geo Arbitrage series. So in today's video, I'll briefly give you an update of my November income from my Geo Arbitrage funds, and then I'll talk about how to find temporary housing and some ideas. And at the end of the video, I'll share some housing tips. Okay, so let's start with November income. My November income is broken down into two funds. One's a core fund and one's a support fund. And so the first fund is XPay, which makes up 73% of this allocation. And the support fund consists of RDTE, which makes up about 27%. And it's broken down into two forms. The core part is supposed to be less volatile, more reliable. And the support fund is a little bit more volatile because it pays a little bit more. Okay, so starting with XPay, if you're new here to my channel, this is the S&P 500 Index Exposure Fund. It's an ETF, and one of the reasons why I chose this fund is not because of total return or high dividends. It's more for the reliability and the safety of the fund. I mean, if you look at how XPay compares to some other popular funds, such as CHPY and WPAY, you can see that during market downturns, it doesn't actually drop as fast or sharp as other funds. And that's what I want in a reliable fund, especially if I'm living off of it when I'm overseas. So if we look a little bit closer, you can see that in the 1 month return, while other funds are red, XPay is green. And again, it's not for a total return. It's really just a dependable source of income. And it's not going to produce as high dividends as some other high flyers, but it's something where I don't have to worry about when I'm overseas and traveling and enjoying life. I can have a better night's sleep and not have to worry about market volatility. Now, a little bit about my XPay holding. It paid on December 11th, and my average cost right now is $53.28. So as long as it stays around that price, I'm really happy. And actually, XPay has the NAV net asset value has been relatively stable compared to other funds. Now, the yield on cost right now for me is 21%, and I have about 1,100 shares. And every time it dips under 53 or my average cost, I'm a buyer. Now, if we look at the announcement and dividend payment, you can see I got paid on December 11th, 95 cents per share for a grand total of $1,048.13. Now, RDTE, it has some exposure to the Russell 2000 index. It's a weekly payer. My average cost is about $30.75. And my yield on cost right now is 32%. And I have about 700 shares. So if we look at how it pays weekly, you can see that most weeks are sort of in the low 20-cent range. And some weeks it might pay something like 38 cents. Not common, but it's nice to have those payments every now and then. Now, if we look at my RDTE history, you can see that in November, the first 3 weeks, I actually got around 300 bucks. And the reason why is because sometimes, depending on the news, RDTE is a good position to do a short swing trade. It's not something that I rely on and something I can do every month. It's just once in a while for a little bit of extra income. But if you look at the last week of the payment, you can see that more than not, that's what the average payment looks like. It's around $150 to $170. So that's what I can expect on most weeks. So I received a total of about $1,160. And if we combine the two payments or distributions from XPay and RDTE, I made $2,208. And that's what I'm going to use to live off every month, or at least from November. Now, if we look at the cost of living in Asia, and this is as of October 2025, you can see that in most parts of Asia, you can live on less than $2,000 pretty easily, right? Tokyo being the most expensive and Hanoi being the cheapest. However, when you look at these costs, they're more for locals and people who live with their family, people who live in shared housing. And a lot of times, local people don't have the same kind of debt. Think of car loan debt, university student loan debt. So they just have a lot less to pay. And so they can live off of this. But if you're an expat and you live alone and you like to travel and you like some Western conveniences, it's probably going to cost maybe two times this, somewhere between $1,500 and $2,000 minimally to live, a pretty comfortable life. And of course, if you are new to a country, you're going to be paying a lot more your first year, and then as where the places to shop, the things that are not good or tourist traps, then of course your cost of living will go a little bit cheaper. But for most people, under $2,000 is a comfortable life. Now, if I give you some examples between Bangkok and Hanoi, you can see that Hanoi is about $652. Bangkok is about $958. And if we look at things like food expenses, anywhere between $200 to $300. I actually live on that in Taiwan. And I think it's really doable to actually save a little bit of money if you don't have a lot of things that you have to pay back home. So if we look at Taipei, Taipei is about $1,300, but that really depends because if you live in nicer areas, you're going to pay a lot more. But for me, right now, I'm paying about 800, 700 to $800 in rent. And so if I make $2,000 a month, I have a lot of money left over to spend on things like food, travel, and other expenses. Okay, so let's move on to housing search. Sorry, I spent a little bit more time on the income part, but I think it's important to see like how much you actually need to start living when you do geo arbitrage. Now, when I think about the housing search and I think of transition sites and official sites, I think this is an important distinction to make. For me, transition sites are sites that you don't have to into an official contract, and official sites usually offer somewhere between a 6 to 12 month contract. Now, you can get a little bit shorter term, like 3 months, but a lot of times those contracts come at a higher cost, or there are some things that you can't do while you're living there. So, when we think about transition sites, think of things like hotel chains, think of like Airbnbs, and for official sites, think of like property management companies, and sometimes even Facebook groups. Because I know some of you may not use Facebook groups, but when you're here traveling in Asia, quite a few people promote and advertise their listings in Facebook groups, and sometimes there'll be an agent, so you'll have to sign a contract, or sometimes it's like a landlord who's reaching out directly. So, if you've not used Facebook groups before, it might be something to look into if you're actually wanting to move to a new country in Asia and do geo arbitrage. Okay, so looking at Airbnb, for me, of course, it's obvious that size really affects the price, but some things to consider are, having a shared bathroom, proximity to the metro or public transit system, gender. Some places are female only, so that could affect your choices. And then, of course, length of stay. The longer you stay in some of these places, sometimes you'll get a little discount. Okay, so talking about shared bathroom, if you're by yourself and you don't have a lot of things, then I think it's okay to temporarily stay at a place that has a shared bathroom. For me, the most important thing is to have a private bedroom. Proximity to metro, depending on where you are, if you have access to Grab, then this is not such a big, thing. If you want to save a little bit of money, yeah, live farther away from the metro, maybe 15 to 20 minutes, maybe bike right to the station, walk to the station, or even have a scooter yourself. And I talked about the gender and the length of stay, so let me show you some examples. If you look at the picture on the left, that's an example of a shared housing place, and you have to be female. But if you look at the monthly cost, only $389. And remember, this is not permanent housing. This is transition housing. You stay there while you're looking for more permanent housing. I think to me, that's the best strategy. If you look at the picture at the right, you can see that that's probably a really common place around Asia. Maybe more specific to like Taipei or Japan. But you get one bedroom, private, and then all the other things like a bathroom and a kitchen are all common, like shared. But you can see that the price jumps a little bit to $600 a month, which to me is still pretty cheap if you consider that it's just temporary housing. If you rent or book like a Western hotel, you're probably going to be spending like 1,000 a week, or maybe for 2 weeks. But $600 for a month gives you just more time and flexibility to find the place that you really want to live for like 6 months to a year. So if I give you some examples of what shared housing could look like, you see that there's a single bedroom. Kitchen also has a laundry unit. So you're probably going to be, running into people while you're there. And it's kind of nice because you may not have kitchen utensils, plates, or whatever, but in a lot of these places, they have those things that you can use for free. Bathroom, you have no bathtub, but you have showers. That's pretty standard. And a lot of time, these places come with free shampoo and free conditioner. But if you're in Taiwan, they are trying to be a little bit more green. So a lot of these places don't provide things like toothpaste or toothbrushes anymore. They used to, but I think they're just trying to be more green and not share those type of amenities, which is kind of a bummer, but it makes sense. Now, if you look at the common area, you notice that in your bedroom, there's not a lot of space to do anything. So it's common to go to these areas, find a table, use the free Wi Fi, and do some work there or studying. Now, if you want to pay a little bit more, there are things like, people offer a room in their home or their condos. You pay a little bit more, but you might get a few more amenities and a little bit more interaction with the landlord. And if you are with a partner, I probably would do something like these two units. Of course, you pay more than $1,000, but between two people, that's not bad. But you just get a little bit more privacy. The amenities are a little bit more modern, and of course, you have your own bathroom. So, kind of really depends on your budget, if you're traveling alone or with a partner, and how long you want to, stay there. Okay, so some housing tips to think about. Now, when I'm looking for transition places, a good place to start is, sites like Booking and Agoda, and they have a lot of listings in Asia, and you don't have to book directly to them. Sometimes it's just good to, do some research. Maybe book like a couple of days first through the websites, and then go directly to those places to see if you can get a cheaper deal. A lot of times, if you go directly to the landlord and you kind of negotiate, you might get a better deal. But not all of them actually speak English. So that's kind of the deal of going through these apps. You don't have to worry about the language. Now, in Taiwan, most people use 591, and it can be a hit or miss. For me, in my experience, a lot of times you'll book a place and you'll go to the site, and then they'll say, "Oh, sorry, we've given this place to another person." So it's not as reliable as some of these other sites, and sometimes you really do need the local language to finish the transaction. So 591 is good, but probably better for locals. Now, surprisingly, if you do know about Klook and Trip, I thought they were just a hotel reservation app, but I've seen more listings for studios on these apps. So that might be a good alternative to like a hotel. It'd probably be a lot cheaper and a little bit nicer than like a regular Airbnb. Okay, so looking at some tips, strategies for planning. Now, I know this might be common sense, but I think it's good to have like 2 months of income before you move. And what I mean by that is, for example, if I get paid in November, that's not going towards like December expenses. That's actually going to go towards January or February expenses. I think when you're living overseas, it's always good to, be ahead because you never know, like, you have to wait for to get paid or distribution. And sometimes while you're waiting, there's like processing time and you can't get money out when you need to. And you don't want to be stuck like that. I've seen a lot of expats who, they're actually broke overseas. They're living month to month. You don't want to be in those shoes. Now, when you're doing geo arbitrage, I think it's easier to save a couple of months in advance. I mean, remember, you're paying like $500 to $800 a month typically. So it's a lot easier to save that type of rent than like, if you're living in like California, for example, and rent is like 2,000, so you got to save like 6,000. That's a lot harder to save than, let's say, $2,000. Okay, so always be ahead because sometimes you might be in a place and you really have to move, but you can't because you don't have money. I think it's just better to always have 2 months of money ready to go to either move to the next place, or leave the country. Okay, last but not least, money access. You need to get your money right. Probably a lot of people don't know this, but there are a lot of 7-Elevens all over Asia. And if you have an international ATM card, you can actually use 7-Eleven to withdraw cash. Now, there are some limits depending on the 7-Eleven, the country, and sometimes your bank. But for me in Taiwan, it's about $600 to $700 per transaction. Okay, so you might have to do a couple of days of withdrawals in order to get enough money for rent or the transition hotel that you're staying at. Now, if you can't use 7-Eleven, post office might be the next best choice. There are a lot of countries that actually use the post office for banking services. I know in Taiwan and Japan, a lot of people do rely on the post office, and you can actually send money there. I haven't actually received money through the post office, but that might be something in the future. I know they're expanding their services all the time. Now, if you do have a little like residency or some kind of right to stay, it might be easier to open up a bank. But if you don't, there are a lot of qualifications or restrictions for doing business at bank. So for me, 7-Elevens and post offices are usually the most convenient places to withdraw money. That said, I will say that more and more places in Asia are doing digital payments. So, pay through QR code or direct transfer. So, if you have like a digital payment system, you might just be able to pay directly to the landlord via like some kind of QR code or online transfer system. So, you might want to do more research into that. And I'll have a video that sometime in the future. But just some things to consider if you're doing geo arbitrage. Okay, so that was episode number two. How to find a home, a transition place before you find permanent housing, I think is an important tip and strategy for those people who are experimenting with the idea of doing geo arbitrage. Not necessarily to retire early, but just to have, a better sense of, balance between life and all the experiences you want to have before you, pass away. All right, so that's the end of this video. Please like this video and subscribe to watch more free content on achieving financial freedom and living in Asia. If you're interested in more financial freedom, check out these two videos. They might be interesting to you if you're interested in things like retirement with a Roth IRA, using high yield dividend ETFs, or just living in Asia. And this video is for entertainment purposes only. It is not intended as financial advice. Consult with a qualified financial advisor before making any investment decisions. Take care and see you in the next video.